Okay, today we're going to be flying from Toronto International Airport to Buffalo in the Airbus 320 by Flight Factor. And I only recently purchased this plane, although it's been around for a while, but I've really started to like it and really get a lot of fun out of flying it. So when I first purchased it, I found that it was kind of a clunky interface with Pilot2ATC, which is a utility I really like to use when flying, as it gives you the opportunity to use real voice communication with air traffic controller, and it also gives you fantastic in-flight progress of where you're going, as well as auto-tunes your radios, etc. So to get Pilot2ATC to work with Flight Factor took a little bit of figuring out, and one of the unique things about the Flight Factor Airbus 320 is what they call the MCDU, the MCDU, which is the FMS controller in other planes known as. It was a little bit of experience to learn how to properly program the MCDU and how it interfaced as well with Pilot2ATC and how you could import flights planned on Pilot2ATC. So first thing I want to bring up is just the where the flight plans are stored in Flight Factor. And there's a lot of information on the internet out there, but there's also confusing information out there because Flight Factor does make other planes, and they've changed for this particular plane where they store the flight plans. And in this case, if you look in the Flight Factor A320 folder, you'll see a folder called Data. And it's inside the Data folder in this file called Coordinate, where the flight plans are saved. Now this is the one thing I really don't like about the Flight Factor A320 is importing flight plans and saving them, because you have to have your flight plan loaded into this file before you can load your plane, or it's not available to import. And so it's of all the sophistication in the A320, I don't know why they couldn't have made a better interface for importing flight plans, but maybe they were simulating the real world. I don't know. Anyhow, when you're using Pilot2ATC to create your flights, you have to really load Pilot2ATC first if your flight isn't pre-planned already. And so let's just load a flight here that we've already created previously, but we're going to go from Toronto to Buffalo. And if you haven't created this flight already for Flight Factor and exported it, you have to load Pilot2ATC before you start up xplane. So that's the first clue in terms of interfacing Pilot2ATC with Flight Factor, is you need to load Pilot2ATC first if you're using it to generate your flight plans. Now there are a lot of other flight planning software out there, but I like to use Pilot2ATC because then when you're flying it coincides with the flight that you created. You can import other plans from otherwhere, but this does a pretty good job. It also has current airport information. When you click the info button here, you can get the current weather, etc., from the airport that you're leaving from, which would indicate the active runways, etc., for planning your flight. And it does a pretty good job of, if you're connected to your plane, it gives a pretty good job of indicating what the active runways are when you're actually creating your plan. So here's a plan that we created using Pilot2ATC, and we just used the auto plan and input the departing and arrival runways. So to export this plan to Flight Factor, you just click on Export, And you'll see here that it has a whole range of places that you can export your file to. And this one here is the Flight Factor A320. And it puts it to this file core to init. And so you want to, it will prompt you here to select the location of that file before you export. But then you just push the export button, and then your file is loaded, available to you on the plane. All right, so getting back to the plane here, I like to use checklists for startup procedures and for departure, flying, etc., because it takes, otherwise you're always wondering if you forgot something. Now there's an extensive startup list that actually for the A320, so I use my own custom list because I use what's needed, the bare minimum, to get the flight filed and flying. And also a lot of the checklists, they don't have a particular order that you start up. They have different functions in different areas, but there's usually a good sequence that fits nicely together when you're starting up a plane. And so I've created my own custom checklist. So if I go to the checklist here on the cold and dark on the A320, and as you can see, it indeed is cold and dark as the lights are out.
On.
So
ground services.
One thing I like to do is using the ground services plug-in. I like to actually have some activity around the aircraft while I'm in the pre-flight mode. So using the ground services utility here, which is a plugin you can download. Now I don't use the stairs because we're at a gateway and we're at an auto gate. So then we just drive up the service vehicles. So again, this isn't an official A320 startup procedure. This is my procedure that works according to how I like to fly it. So inside the plane now, you'll notice that to start up, this is the panel on the side here where you go to do the initial startup procedures for the plane. So I like to
set fuel call and set.
Put the chocks on the plane. Then I like to load the fuel that I'm going to need for the flight. The flight today to Buffalo is a short flight. We'll just add a little additional fuel here. What is 5,000 is plenty, and we'll set that. You can actually calculate the exact fuel that you need using other flight planners. So then you have an idea of what the fuel is for the flight that you're going on. Then you'll also need to set the passengers here. So in order to adjust the passengers, you need to push these call buttons here. And then we'll adjust the passenger list. We'll say we'll put down 104 for today is good. And then also you need to adjust the cargo. Now the reason why I do these as the initial preliminary startup, because there's some data here from loading the plane that you'll need later for setting your McDo. So that's why this is one of the first things that I do, is calculating the cargo. So we need to call for the baggage loader, and we'll just put in about 7,000 pounds. All right, so
check.
Following our checklist
PAX
up here,
call and set.
With the PAX call and set is the passenger.
Cargo call and set.
That's the cargo.
Check. Perf data record trim positin.
Now this is the information that you need to knowing the weight of the plane with the fuel and the passengers on it. And you can see there from that data that this is the one you need here for the McDo. It's up 0.3. So take note of that number and write it down because you'll need that later.
Check.
And now we need to get
supply ground power.
Ground power started here.
On. Aviator flashlight as needed.
And because we're in the dark, we need an aviator flashlight, which is found under your menu up here, under View. Alright, that didn't work. Oh, there it is, it's working. Alright, so we've got our aviator flashlight.
Check. Battery master 1 on.
So now we look on our control panel up here for the battery 1 master. And this will check the current voltage of the battery to make sure that it's
check. Battery master 2 on.
Sufficient voltage showing.
Check.
Check the
external
battery
power
master.
on.
And we can see the green light here shows that external power is available. So you click that.
Check. Dome light as needed.
Still pretty dark, so we want to put some dome light on here so that we can see the instruments.
Check.
And then we can turn
ADR123 set to NAV.
We can turn our aviation flashlight off. Alright, so you need to set these 3 controls up here, which helps to align the plane to the GPS system so that your instruments are tracking correctly.
Check. LTK pumps on.
Alright, so the next series, when you see anything that has a white light on it, it indicates that normally the instruments in the plane are dark if everything is set correctly. So if you see things with either blue lights, green lights, white lights, that means that they're either manually set or they need to be set. That when they're in the white position, it means that they need to be turned on according to your current configuration. So we're just going to turn on these pumps up here and the oxygen here. Just to save a little bit of time, we won't go through the checklist one at a time.
Check.
For those, and then
CTR pumps
we'll
on.
do them all together.
Check. RTK pumps on. Check. Crew oxygen on. Check.
Alright, so
emergency lights arm.
We want to set a bit of lighting here, and we'll also put on the no smoking and the seatbelt sign.
Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has just turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. Please be seated and check to see that your seatbelt is securely fastened. Thank you.
Alright, so we'll continue through the checklist here with the lighting.
Check. NAV lights on. Check. Wing lights on. Check. Beacon on. Check. Strobe auto. Check. No smoking on. Check. Seat belts on. Check. Init MCDU.
Alright, so now we're at the stage where we want to actually program the MCDU. So I've already mentioned some of the things I love about this MCDU and some things I don't like. One of them, of course, is loading flights that have already been created. You have to do that. You have to create those flights ahead of time and make sure they're loaded into that file, the core-to-init file. Otherwise, they won't load. Now, there is a way that I saw on the internet how you can get around that, and that is by, if you're subscribed to something like Navigraph, you can update your database, and somehow that updates the database in the MCDU here as well, so that you don't have to shut your plane down and reload it. But best practice is plan your route ahead of time, load it into that file, and then it's available. So the first thing that it's asking us to do here is to init. So you push the init button here, the
Check.
initialization.
Enter route.
And then you can put in the route and the route that you've already saved. So this time we're going CYYZ to K Buffalo. And we have actually 2 routes in there, so you have to remember as well the name it doesn't give you a nice list of files that are available. That's one of the things I don't like about it. You have to type in correctly and have the correct file, and the only way you can do that is take note of that when the plan is actually saved. But if you come back sometime later, you don't remember exactly if it's, particularly if you have different routes to the same airport. Anyhow, enough of that. Let's load the plan here, and we've got the route loaded there.
Enter FLT number.
And I think I'm going to be flying the Canadian Express here today. So we'll put that on there. And we lost our checklist here. So
Init MCDU. Check. Enter route. Check. Enter FLT number. Check. IRS init.
Alright, so this is for initiating the alignment of the aircraft to the GPS system. So you need to align that, otherwise your
Check.
Flight plan
Align
won't
on
work.
ref. Check. Wait request.
The next thing is the system needs to know the weight of the aircraft for setting takeoff speeds, etc. So going back to the init screen here, if you push this arrow to the right, it takes you over to a second screen where you can push the weight request, and that'll put in that information that you loaded previously. That's why when you're initially starting, you like to load the fuel, the passengers, the cargo and everything, so that you have the correct weight of the aircraft ahead of time. And based on the fuel that you've entered, it'll tell you whether you have enough fuel to get to where you're going. So currently we have 2.5 hours of extra flying time, which should allow us to get to an alternate airport if for some reason we're unable to land at Buffalo. So that's the
Check.
weight request.
Performance flaps and FLX.
So now you need to also enter that information that you found earlier in terms of what the trim is set for takeoff. And if you remember, in that case it was up 0.3. So we're going to put in here flaps down to position, the trim up 0.3, and we put that in there. The temperature flux, I'm not really sure. I haven't really studied on what the correct procedure is for setting that. Someone said you'd take the current temperature, add 32 degrees. Whether that's correct or not, I don't know. But anyhow, putting in 48 works. Then for the VRs here, you can actually click on them and it'll put in the correct VR takeoff rotation speeds. And VR1 you need to input manually, so we'll just put in 120. Alright, so
Check.
we've set that.
Performance V1 to V3. Check. Flight plan.
Okay, the next item on the checklist is to look at your flight plan to find out where you've got breaks in the flight that you have to fix. So we see here that we've got a manual transition in the flight plan discontinuity. So in order to fix that, push the clear button, click on manual, push the clear button again, click on the flight plan discontinuity, and then insert the changes. And we're good to go.
Check. File plan with ATC.
So now we need to file the plan with air traffic control.
We're not ready to pick up the clearance at this time. We just need to reposition.
Canadian Express 587 ready to copy IFR clearance.
Canadian Express 587, we don't have a flight plan on file for you.
Okay, so the first thing you need to do is to upload your plan using the Pilot2ATC. And if you look at Pilot2ATC here, you'll see that we've loaded our flight plan here, but we need to file it before we can start asking for clearance from ATC. And if it's a good flight plan, this will turn green up here. So this is Pilot2ATC is very good for creating flight plans. All you do is put in your departure and destination and click on auto plan, and it'll do a good plan for you, putting in all the stars and the SIDS. Alright, enough said about that. We've got our flight plan loaded now. We just have to get clearance from ATC. Canadian Express 587 ready to copy IFR clearance.
Canadian Express 587 is cleared to Kilo Bravo Uniform Foxtrot, climb via the KEPTA-2 departure, with the WOZ transition, then as filed. Expect departure runway 23. Maintain 7,000 feet. Departure on 127.57 squawk 5631.
Canadian Express 587 is cleared to Kilo Bravo Uniform Foxtrot, climb via the KEPTA-2 departure, with the WOZ transition, then as filed. Maintain 7,000 feet. Departure on 127.57 squawk 5631.
Canadian Express 587 read back correct. Altimeter 299er8 contact ground on 119er.1 when ready for pushback. Enjoy your morning.
Altimeter 299er8 ground on 119er.1 Canadian Express 587.
Okay, so we've got our clearance now, and we just need to set our barometric pressure. So you need to set it in two places, one up here and then also in the small display here. This small display is used when all your instruments fail. It's on a separate power supply, and actually there was an incident recently of a flight and where the display started to fail. I don't know if it was on an A320, but it might have been. No, or it might have been on the Boeing 737. Anyhow, when all your instruments fail, this will still remain lit, and you can fly using that. But you need to set the barometric pressure for it. Alright, so we've finished our setting our McDo. We need to now continue with our checklist.
Taxi lights.
Set the taxi lights next.
On. Autopilot setup.
So the autopilot setup on the Airbus is very simple. You really just have to set your cruising altitude, and all the other sets are controlled by the McDo, so you don't have to set your speed, headings, etc. Everything is controlled by the McDo for the autopilot. It's a very nice autopilot system, and I also like that you can choose for setting by 100 or 1000. So we're just flying at a very short flight, so we're only going up to 7,000 feet on our flight to Buffalo, and so we'll just set that for 7,000 here. If I can get it. Doesn't want to go to 7. There we go.
We are unable to cross height at 250 knots. Request to cross height at a higher speed.
And just ensure that there's dashes here indicating that the speed and the VNAV as well as the LNAV are being controlled by the flight management system.
Check. Transponder.
Transponder is on standby.
STBY. Altimeter, set.
Altimeter, we've set
Check.
the barometric pressure.
Pre-plan pushback.
Alright, so now we just need to ensure that the pushback knows the direction and heading that we want. That looks good.
Ground to cockpit, plan acknowledged. Call me
Check.
through the menu when you are ready.
Passenger welcome.
If you're using the passenger plug-in,
Check.
that's where you would
Probe
want to
heat on.
put in the welcome message.
Clearance, Sun Country 8611,
Put some probe heat on here.
to Detroit with X-ray.
Check. Anti-ice as needed.
Usually
Check.
flying out of Toronto, you need
Remove
it.
fuel
but
trucks.
weather's starting to warm up, so we don't need it today. Alright, let's get rid of all these
Alright, clear to Detroit by the Paget
fuel
2.
trucks here.
Check. Remove passenger stairs. Check. Remove cargo truck. Check. APU master on.
Putting on the APU master.
Check. APU start.
Good morning. We're trying to get clearance to Houston.
So we're going to be disconnecting our ground power, so we need the APU on in order to start the engines once we get the pushback. So we've set the APU
Check.
start, and you have to wait
APU
until
breathe when APU avail.
the APU cranks up, and this light down here will turn to available. It'll be a green light and available. And when that turns to green, then we can put on the APU bleed and then get our pushback. So you can see the service vehicles are starting to pull away now. They've finished fueling the plane, loading the cargo, etc. And one of the things that you might want to check is to see that all the cargo doors are closed. And so you can see here all the doors are closed. They're all green. If they were not closed, they would be, I think, yellow. So the doors are all closed. Looking now, our APU is lit, so we can put on the APU bleed.
Check. Ground power off.
And we'll turn the ground power off.
Clarence American 1842
Check.
with Tango.
Chocks
going
off.
to Charlotte.
Turn the chocks off.
American 1842.
Put them
Check.
away.
Affirmative.
Call for pushback.
Alright, we're ready
Yeah,
to
cars is down, so,
ask ground for pushback. Canadian Express 587 ready for pushback.
Canadian Express 587 pushback approved.
Check. Pushback approved. Parking Canadian Express 587.
Ground to cockpit, tow is driving up.
Roger, they fill 2, fill 10,000, 30,010 and 5141, American 1842.
So better pushback is a plug-in that you can get, and it's free, and it makes the pushback experience
That is affirmative.
Okay, all
better.
doors and hatches are closed, ready to connect.
Plus you can clearly state where you want the pushback to occur. You can avoid running over ground vehicles, etc. or marshalers, and it's a good little utility. And it really
So connected and bypass pin inserted. Release parking brake.
All right, so when we release the parking brake here, you'll also notice that the auto gate will pull back.
Off.
Starting pushback.
Check throttle idle.
Start engines.
All right, so you can see here that the gate is moving back and the plane is pushing back into position. And during the pushback phase, you can start your engines.
9611, way information, Tango. We're
So
going to Louisville,
check first of all that your plane is in the idle position, your throttle.
Check. Ignition start.
Put the ignition to start.
To be honest with you, we never got our
Check.
previous PDC.
Start engine 2.
And then you can start engine 2. And you can monitor it here to see if it is in fact starting.
I'm sorry about that. You were stepped on for UPS.
And you can see here that the PSI, oil pressure, everything is coming up, so the engine is going to start. And then you can hear it come to life. And we'll start engine 1.
Check. Verify instrument panel. Check. Start engine 1. Check. Verify instrument panel.
Just verify that it's starting okay.
Check. Ignition off.
And once that engine starts, we'll turn the ignition off and also shut down the APU. Alright, we've got both our engines going. We'll shut down the APU as well as turn the ignition off.
We already have it. We've got a message to give you all a call on our previous
Check. Set parking brake.
So, you set the parking brake after you get the pushback. And it looks like our push guy is having a bit of fun moving us around the airport. So, he still hasn't finished. In the meantime, we can do some of the other things on here, including turning the APU bleed off. Alright, and we'll turn also the APU off. The auto brake to max, that is found right here. This little button here, that's auto brake to max. You need to put that on. And when the push guy finishes moving us around the airport, we'll call for taxi.
Operation complete. Set parking brake.
Charlie Zulu Airport via the Bang 2 departure, London transition.
Check.
Disconnecting tow.
APU
Stand
bleed
by.
off.
Victor,
And we've done
Check.
these things already.
APU off.
Lima,
Check.
Echo, Golf, Golf, Tango,
Auto brake max.
Jet 43,
Check.
Papa, Lima, Yankee,
Request
Echo,
taxi
Romeo,
to active.
direct Kilo, November, Oscar, Sierra Tango.
Canadian Express 587, request taxi to runway 23.
215.
Canadian Express 587 taxi to runway 23 via taxiways Alpha Tango, Alpha, Hotel, Quebec, hold short runway 23.
Check. Taxi to runway 23 via taxiways Alpha Tango, Alpha, Hotel, Quebec, hold short runway 23 Canadian Express 587.
Papa, India, Sierra, Alpha Delta. Uniform Mike 215.
Alright, our
Tow
pushback
is
is still
disconnected
there.
and bypass pin has been removed. Hand signal will be on the right. We'll see you next time and have a great flight.
Lima, Echo, Romeo, Uniform, Victor. Direct November.
Alright,
Victor,
the
Echo,
push
Victor.
guard has
Direct Charlie,
left so we can begin our
Direct
taxi.
Mike, Charlie, Zulu.
Now,
Maintain
Pilot to
110,000.
ATC,
Expect flight level 330.
it's a great little program for actually drawing your taxiway out for you, and you can follow it along here. So the instructions that you get from the air traffic controller are automatically drawn here, and this can be quite useful in some of the more complicated airports.
Upper Mike
5.
All right, so we'll do our taxi and then we'll get back when we're ready for takeoff.
Direct to the airport, 10,000 feet.
So when you're getting close to the departure runway, you want to complete your checklist. One of the advantages of using a checklist is when you actually go to take off, you're not worried about that you have possibly forgotten anything, perhaps something critical that's going to bring your plane down. So what you want to do is set your squawk into the active mode here, so that the air traffic controller can track your
Check. Set flaps
flight.
takeoff.
And we need to set our flaps for takeoff, which will be at the 2 position.
Check. Adjust trim for takeoff.
So, as you remember setting the trim before, we wrote down what the trim was going to be for takeoff. And in this case, it's going to be up 0.5. So, just check here that we're up 0.5. Okay, so our trim is set for takeoff.
Check. Arm speed brake.
This doesn't. Sometimes this is hard to arm. It doesn't. There we go. It should be a little white collar on it when it's armed.
Check. Takeoff config test.
Alright, the takeoff config, it's a little button right down here. Maybe we can see it better up here.
Clearance Southwest 1307 to LaGuardia, Romeo. Southwest 1307.
That just confirms that your configuration is correct for takeoff, and you'll see that if everything is green here, you're good to go.
Check. Landing lights on.
Put the landing lights on.
Check. Taxi lights off.
Okay, 1958 Edict.
Check. Landing gear up.
Alright, we're good to go. So we'll just pull up to the runway here, get clearance from the tower for takeoff, and we'll be in the air in no time.
Okay, sorry, Jack 2, Southwest 1307.
Now the throttle on the Airbus A320 is a little different than some of the other aircraft. It uses the positioning on the throttle to actually engage things like auto thrust, and if it's not set in the exact position, your auto thrust won't work, and you'll find your plane doing crazy things, and it won't hold to the VNAV either. So
Canadian Express 587 contact tower on 118.35. Have a good morning.
Tower on 118.35 Canadian Express 587.
So the throttle is something you have to pay very close attention to, and I'll show you when we're in the takeoff position.
Yeah, what are you showing wheels up time for us going to Philly?
1661, I show an edict of 2052.
Canadian Express 587 ready for departure, runway 23.
Canadian Express 587 winds are 290 at 7 knots, cleared for takeoff. Runway 23 squawk 5631.
Approaching 23.
Cleared for takeoff. Runway 23 squawking 5631 Canadian Express 587.
Okay, thank you. Clearance Air Shuttle 6027 to Washington.
Air Shuttle 6027 has been cleared for the Washington Dulles Airport via the... And was that Southwest 186? Southwest 186 affirmative. I have a full route clearance going to Tampa, advising ready to copy.
On runway 23.
Via the Smoke to departure, Wallet transition, direct Oscar Tango Kilo, direct Tango Alpha Yankee into base for arrival.
So as you move the throttle up, you'll hear little clicks as it moves into the different positions.
Alright, we're going out on the small to all transmission.
Southwest 186, read back right, and I just want to verify that's the date for arrival.
And when you reach
Thank you.
V1, V2, rotate, you'll see the green arrow come down here.
Good morning, 68822, fairways, Mobility.
Ticket 822, clearing Squid Mills with Lake Capital 1 departure, flight plan runway 20, spotter 5.
Canadian Express 587 turn left heading 168, then intercept course to Sabre then as filed.
Heading 168 to Sabre then as filed. Canadian Express 587.
Alright, so we need to check that we've got the little notch in the correct position there. And then we can put on the autopilot.
Canadian Express 587 slow to 250 knots or less.
Wilco Canadian Express 587.
And I mentioned the throttle is a little tricky, and you'll notice that the auto throttle went off there. Started
Canadian
to
Express
overspeed.
587 contact Toronto
So,
departure on 128.8.
look at your throttle
day.
here again. and make
Departure
sure
on
that that's clicked in the
128.8
proper
Canadian
place
Express
there.
587. Departure Canadian Express 587 climbing to 7,000 feet.
Canadian Express 587 good morning. Radar contact.
Departure again, 263 at 2505. At Canada 263, departure identified. True noise, turn left, heading 33056. At Canada 263,
Alright, so we can see our route on here now, and there's not much to do until we actually get closer to the arrival in Buffalo. So we'll get back once we're closer to the arrival, and we'll show you the ILS approach system using the Airbus 320. But it follows the path pretty good, and the VNAV works on it very well, very good as well in keeping the correct speeds. And unlike the FMS and some of the other planes, it's hard to get the VNAV to work correctly. But we'll come back once we're closer to the arrival in Buffalo. Okay, we're getting close to Buffalo, so let's do some of the things on the approach and landing checklist. Verify course setting. So if we actually bring up our McDo here, you'll see that we've got some flight plan discontinuity here, which we have to fix. When we get a little closer to Wozy, we'll fix that. Concerned about fixing it right now. It might pull us off course a little too much. Anyhow, you can see also that as we approach Buffalo here, we've got a very steep left turn, and it's like turning in a car going 100 miles an hour. You actually have to slow down if you want to make the turn, so we'll do that as well.
Check.
So we verified the course
Verify
setting.
fuel quantity.
Make sure you have enough fuel to land.
Check. Seat belt sign, on.
Turn the seat belts back on.
Check. Altimeter, set.
Altimeter setting is okay.
Check. Wing/landing lights, on. Check. NAV radios, set.
Now, one of the things I do like about the do is that it tunes the radios for you automatically. So once you put in your course, it automatically loads the correct frequencies for your nav radios, including the ILS. So you don't have to tune any radios, and so that's a great function of the do here. You can see here that all the frequencies are already there, loaded right from your flight plan. So no tuning of radios when you're coming in for an ILS approach. It's really great.
Check. Speed brakes, set as required. Check. Flaps, set as required. Check. Landing
All right.
gear, down.
So we're coming in, getting fairly close. Let's start reducing our speed here so that we can make this hairpin turn coming up.
1717 heavy, don't record the check being 7 maintain 5,000, runway 16 left.
Bring it down to 205 should be okay. And now let's fix that discontinuity here. Alright, so we should have our setting here now. What happened here?
Alaska 96, head approach welcome, well, so now continue plan for the right side, so to maintain 4,000.
Let's go direct to cruise. Alright, we got our flight plan fixed now. As you can see, we've got the turn going out here for the approach. And our speed is coming down. Yep, we're down at a good speed. We should be able to make that turn. If your speed is too high, it won't be able to make a tight turn like that. So you have to lower your speeds, just as if you're turning a corner in the car. you slow down going into the curve.
Next 1717 heavy is 3.5 miles from Kenmore, flight heading 190, maintain 5,000 to establish cleared ILS, runway 16 left.
And we can also drop our altitude here. We'll bring it down to a 4,000.
Canadian Express 587 cleared for the ILS approach to runway 23 with the TRVA transition.
Cleared for the ILS approach to runway 23 with the TRVA transition. Canadian Express 587.
We'll put down the flap to give us a little leeway there on our speed.
Canadian Express 587 altimeter 3001 at Buffalo Niagara International Contact Tower on 120.5. Enjoy your morning.
Altimeter 3001 tower on 120.5. Canadian Express 587. Tower Canadian Express 587 inbound for ILS approach runway 23.
Canadian Express 587 good morning. Radar contact. Continue ILS to runway 23 call when established on final.
Continue ILS to runway 23 will call when established on final Canadian Express 587.
Okay, we got a bit of a problem here. The auto throttle isn't holding. Alright, so we'll put on a bit of speed brake here to try and bring our speed down.
695, once you're established, maintain 200 knots or greater. 200 better once established, 695.
So sometimes the tower will actually give you vectors for the ILS approach, but in this case they're just telling us to let them know when we're on the final approach. So fortunately the route is programmed into the McDo, and it'll take us right around this loop here and line us up perfectly for the ILS approach. Alright, so we released the speed brakes. We've got our speed down to 205 now, so that should hold us in this tight turn going around the loop. So that's one of the things you have to constantly watch, is that your throttle there is in the correct notches for the auto throttle to work. Because sometimes things get out of alignment and it's easy to get over speed or under speed. And your VNAV, your speed isn't working correctly, so just something to keep an eye on. Alright, so we're following around this loop here, and it'll bring us right around to the ILS approach. And like I said, you don't even need to tune your nav radios for the ILS frequency. It's already programmed into the McDo. We're just going to lower our altitude down to 3,500 feet here, and on your setting here you can choose by hundreds or thousands. Since we're already at 4,000, we'll just need to go down 500 feet. So we're making the final turn here now to line up with the ILS approach. Once we're clear of this final turn here and lined up, we're going to change our nav button up here and put it onto the ILS so that we can see how we are in terms of lining up. Okay, we looped around and now we're on the ILS approach into Buffalo, and we're about 11 miles out. We'll put on the approach button. We're locked in on the ILS signal. We're going to lower our landing gear at this point.
Check.
And we'll start to reduce our speed. The Airbus lands at quite a low speed.
Idaho 26, contact tower 118.3.
I think about 145 knots, something like that. So you've got to reduce your speed considerably for landing, unlike the 747. Alright, you can see here now that we're locked in on the glide slope, so we need to report to tower that we're locked in on the final. Canadian Express 587 established on final.
Canadian Express 587 winds are 241 at 9 knots, cleared to land runway 23.
Cleared to land runway 23 Canadian Express 587.
Papa Charlie, Terminal Factor, via Flight Factor. 2 Papa. 149 contact, approach on 121.3, taking Mr. Heavy. And it's a 59 Heavy, turn left, heading 360. The left, heading 360, turning 539.
Alright, the speed is finally holding correctly. We're about 3 miles out, our landing gear is down.
Flaps. Flaps.
Alright, we'll put our flaps on full for the final approach. Now, for landing, what you want to do is have this little red button visible here, because at about 200 feet that disconnects the autopilot.
Approaching 23.
And so that's you want that button visible, which makes it handy to disconnect the autopilot when you're on the last 100 or 200 feet. So when you're landing in zero visibility like this, I will take it down to 200 feet before disconnecting the autopilot, because you can't see a thing. so we're now to about the 300 foot mark.
300.
Turn left, heading 310, F310 and clear visual 28 left, 4902.
100. 50. 40. 30. 20. Retard. 20. 10. 5.
Canadian Express 587 exit runway when able.
So the Airbus actually flies very nicely manually, unlike some of the other aircraft, so you don't have to worry about releasing the autopilot. The plane holds its own, whereas some planes, you release the autopilot and all hell breaks loose. So this plane flies very nicely. Alright, so that's just a quick tutorial on flying with the Airbus Flight Factor A320 in conjunction with the Pilot2ATC, how to automatically load your flight plans, and some of the features of the navigation equipment on this bus. Once you start flying this plane, you'll love it, and will probably end up preferring to fly it to your other aircraft. Alright, so that's it. We'll just finish docking at the gate, but for this will be the end of the video for now.
10,000, 4590 first to maintain 5,000.
So this airport, Buffalo, it actually didn't have any auto gates on it, so I actually did another tutorial on how to install auto gates on airports that don't have them, and in 5 minutes you can install an auto gate, so it's not a big deal. You can watch my other video on how to install an auto gate along with a marshaller or other electronic device that guides the planes in, and it makes quite a difference, I find, landing at an airport where you have a proper gate and a proper marshaller where you can. And we went too far. Alright, that's it.
Return heading 34.